Welcome to the YourTown television program. My name's Jeff Kline, your host for this segment. And this segment is sponsored by the Naval Postgraduate School Foundation. We like to bring you what's interesting things that are happening around the peninsula area that our faculty and our students are doing, both in research and education. And in the segment we have today, we would like to welcome Captain Clark Bone, who is our Chair of Information Warfare. He's got a very interesting background, and he does a lot of great things for the students on campus. So let's start by welcoming him to the show.
Well, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Sure, Clark. I always like to start off each show learning a little bit more about you as an individual. And one reason I do that is because most of our faculty are residents of Monterey County, and so your friends and family want to know something about you as well. So how did you end up joining the Navy?
I'm son of a sailor. My dad was a civil engineer in the Navy, CB.
All right.
So moved all around. I enjoyed what we got to do.
So as a kid, where were some of the places you lived?
We lived in Bakersfield, California.
Okay.
And it was interesting to move from there to Portugal. Spent 3.5 years in Lisbon, Portugal area.
Big difference.
Big difference. And then moved to the deep south in Gulfport, Mississippi. Again, a big difference there too.
Right.
So, but other than that, all over Thailand, some time up in New Jersey. I graduated high school. My folks said, we're out of here. We're going to Cuba. They moved down there. So it's been a good number of places I've had the opportunity to go live in.
Well, you know, that's an interesting thing. Most of our students, of course, have families, and they are experiencing that. And as I was a military brat, too. You were a Navy junior. I was an Air Force brat. There's actually nomenclatures for these things. But the downside is you move a lot, and you're away from family, and you don't always maintain lifelong friends. But the positive side is you get to experience New Jersey and Thailand and Portugal and California. And so you're exposed to different cultures and different people. And so the family legacy took you into the Navy. How did you get your commission then?
Right. I went to school at North Carolina State University, graduated and got commissioned via the ROTC program there. Went to surface warfare right out of school there.
So surface warfare, that branch, it mans our ships, destroyers, amphibs, that sort of thing.
Right.
And what ship were you first assigned to?
Sure. The first ship was USS Josephus Daniels out of Norfolk, Virginia.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Old Belknap class cruiser. 30 months on there, and then ended up decommissioning her. Went right over, across the pier to another cruiser, the Thomas S. Gates.
Oh, and what did you do on those ships?
First 2 hours as communications officer, which was topside, which I thoroughly enjoyed being topside on the cruiser, and then on the Thomas S. Gates, I was a fire control officer. Right. On the Aegis weapon system, which was a great job also. I loved it.
But you are an intelligence officer now. So to tell us the road from manning important systems on cruisers to becoming an intelligence officer.
Well, I knew from the get-go I enjoyed being in the Navy. I always enjoyed what I was doing, who I was working with, the mission and everything. But driving the ship wasn't quite what I wanted to do, but I enjoyed being in the Combat Information Center, where it was all about figuring out what the adversary was going to do during war games, et cetera.
So our Combat Information Center is that place on the ship that receives all the information, fuses that information, directs the weapon systems, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Right.
So I would often either sit the surface or the air position, trying to figure out what was happening in an exercise or a war game, and I found that to be really exciting and really interesting. So that was a kind of a natural follow to say, I think intelligence is really what I want to go try to do, and that's been doing it for a good number of years and really enjoyed it.
What did you study in North Carolina?
I was a political science major.
Oh, okay, so it kind of works into that way.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean there's correlations in that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
So did the intelligence community send you to other advanced degrees as well, or what did you have to do to actually transfer your skills?
No, actually, I went straight from a tour on the Thomas S. Gates. Went to a small introduction to Intel course for a few weeks in Virginia Beach, and then out to my first tour. I was on the job at the Joint Intel Center Pacific, where I was sitting there figuring out I was the guy understanding what was happening and making the call for indications and warnings. So if something would happen, military or a diplomatic issue or a political issue somewhere in the area, I was the one making the call.
Wow.
What was going on? So it was fun.
So you've lived fascinating places as a Navy junior.
Yeah.
So what are some of the places you were able to, besides Norfolk as a surface line officer, where did you go? And Hawaii.
And Hawaii.
Yeah.
I get, I've had some really good assignments. Hawaii, I was at Sixth Fleet in Italy, where we worked together, met for the first time.
Right. That was in Gaeta, which is also a dream place to live.
Yeah, absolutely was.
Yeah.
Stationed in Stuttgart, Germany, Newport, Rhode Island, San Diego, California. So it's, but I've done my tours in DC. So there's the good, and then there's the the more administrative side of the Navy.
My alternative motive for asking questions like that is if I ever think there's a high school or college student that watches a show like this, they say, wow, that sounds fascinating, and maybe I want to learn a little bit more. So,
well, I took the Navy up on its word, said join the Navy, see the world, and I've done that, and I've taken that as my motto moving forward.
Well, it's an interesting thing. I always like to have officers on the show that actually are in uniform, because you can tell a lot from an officer on the uniform. You have your surface warfare qualification badge. You also have the information warfare qualification badge, also a badge for the joint staff, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So tell us a little bit about the information warfare community and what you do as a chair here on campus.
Sure. So the information warfare community started in about 2009. The CNO realized that information was really gaining a larger role in how the Navy operated and fought, and really how the joint forces, all the services do. So the idea and the concept behind it was bring those communities together that are integrated around information, that work on it and use it in their daily business, and then bring them together so you can get efficiencies and actually do better on how we work together and integrate. So the information professional community, which are the folks who own, operate, and defend networks, the cryptologic warfare officers who do signals intelligence but also do cyberspace offensive operations, intelligence, and then the meteorology, oceanography, the weather folks, all combined into one community. Then the Information Dominance Corps, which has evolved into the Information Warfare community.
Oh, and so that larger community, you actually kind of look over. You're the school marm for them all at MPS, is that it?
Right, there's about over 175 information warfare officers that go to MPS right now. Largest single Navy community on campus. But it makes sense because we're a very technical community.
Sure.
And that's why we'd have such a large presence there. So I serve in a lot of ways as a mentor to them, to help them out, make sure they get what they need for thesis development, professional development. But I also work with making sure that I can advocate on behalf of the school out to the information warfare enterprise, and then vice versa, information warfare enterprise into the school. So help them identify good thesis topics, research for the school, make sure there's good connectivity.
Well, not to get into classified arenas, but this concept to tie in all the disciplines associated in the Navy with information has some very benefits when you talk about cross-discipline. So that if you're talking about a cryptological signals intelligence individual, their ability to collect that information is highly dependent on the environment, which the meteorology officers have to know. And so how often and how frequently do they bring their disciplines together in order to share the how one causes or how intelligence collection is affected by the other domains?
Well, that's becoming a lot more common now. It's the communities will start out individually as their junior officers, and as they get more senior at the operational level, then what they'll do is they'll start combining quite a bit. I make it a big effort on campus at MPS to bring them all together and make sure that we're all working together. Don't just sit in your little tribes that intermingle.
Right.
But then also on the carrier strike groups, what's happening now is you're seeing the information warfare commander is now an information warfare officer. And what they're responsible for is integration of all of these systems together for the admiral, the strike group, to be more effective as a fighting force.
Well, let's stop back a little bit, because that's kind of a critical concept that a lot of people don't understand. So every battle group has different warfare commanders. So the cruiser might be the air warfare commander, and that cruiser captain is in charge of defense of the entire carrier battle group for air.
Right.
And then you have an anti-submarine warfare commander who is in charge of utilizing the assets in order to ensure that the carrier battle group is defended from submarines. Right. You might have a strike commander who's in charge of actually leveraging all aspects of the battle group to actually attack targets. So now you have an information warfare commander in the battle group. Tell us a little bit, what he does. And I think the nomenclature is Alpha Quebec, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so I'm learning here. So Alpha Quebec is a unique individual. He's more than just a supporting person, though. He's more than just informing these other warfare areas how best to use their sensors, but he also, or she also, has other responsibilities as well.
Right. So from a support structure, there's the battle space awareness, which is both the physical environment of the weather and the ocean, right. And then the intelligence to make sure that the battle group commander and the decision makers have what they need to know. But they also have to control the net to make sure that we understand that we have secure nets to be able to do command and control while we're at sea and reach back to the commanders ashore, but also have the ability to make sure that we're not vulnerable to being attacked by adversary. And then the third, and that's the assured networks. Then the last one would be integrated fires. And this is more of the offensive, and this is kind of the newest and how information becomes a warfare area, is the use of electronic warfare in the strike group to work together and be coordinated across the strike group.
Right.
But also, if we want to integrate cyberspace operations in an offensive nature with strike group commander, their warfare commander. So now all these capabilities lay on top of each other, and we're more effective as a combat force.
Now, could this also include decoy and deception operations, both along electronic and cyber and real world?
Absolutely, that's a very key piece. So which is something that the Navy's really getting back into, and you can say that we kind of got away from it for a while.
So basically, the sneaky guys go in the international warfare command areas.
Exactly.
That's fantastic. Well, let's start with just the intelligence community. When our students graduate, well, let's take an intelligence officer on campus. What are some of the things they study?
Right. So most of them come here after their first or second tour, so they're pretty junior.
Okay.
And so they'll come in, and a majority of them will do a regional affairs major, the National Security Affairs Department, and they'll either concentrate on Asia, Middle East, Africa, or Europe, Eurasia, or Western Hemisphere.
So they'll do a deep dive in that particular region for the culture and the people and that sort
Exactly.
of thing. Yeah.
And then what they'll do when they leave is they'll do an immediate payback tour, or a majority of them, where they'll go work at a joint intelligence center where they'll be working with all the services to support a combatant commander in that area. So they'll go to PACOM's, JIOC, or they'll go out to MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa to go work at Central Command.
Right, so JIOC is that Joint Intelligence Center where you have different services get together.
All together, yeah.
Okay, for that particular region, is it always that way? So that if someone's studying Asian affairs here at MPS, they'll go out to the Joint Operations Information?
We're trying to do that now. Sometimes it's there's a spot there, but we've gotten to the point where about 80% of the officers will do an immediate payback. That means they'll go right to whatever they studied. We also have a few doing cyberspace operations, so they'll go and support intelligence support to cyberspace operations for the national mission teams under Cyber Command.
So what about now your cryptologist, which is the other side, the signals intelligence, the encryption, decryption, and cyber thing? Where do they study and where do they go?
So, of the 175 plus officers that we have here, we're in 16 different curriculums. So we have some of the major difficult ones. We're electrical engineering and computer engineering. We have them in computer science, cyberspace operations.
Well, before you go any further, I have to say this. Those aren't necessarily difficult. Depends on what your talents are. I can't speak French. So French to me is difficult. I found engineering a little easier.
I find it difficult because I don't understand what their theses are all the time.
Got it. That's right. You have to read them. That's right. You have to say, yes, this is worthy. Yes. But it's got a lot of Greek letters in it.
It's math without any numbers. I don't understand.
I'm sorry, go ahead. So what do our cryptologist officers do?
So cryptologist officers, so they're either looking at electrical engineering and computer science to understand how to develop systems or how to use cyberspace, how to use the tools and techniques for cyber operations for SIGINT collection. And then when they leave here, they'll go on. Some of them will actually, because they come here a little more senior, they'll either go back to sea, where they'll be coordinating SIGINT collection afloat, or they'll be going to a shore command where they'll be working on cyberspace operations somewhere around the globe.
And our meteorology students and oceanography students?
So meteorology and oceanography, they, for the most part, all come here, get their graduate degree, and go right to an operational tour where they'll either be in a strike group or a carrier, aircraft carrier, as a meteorologist for the strike group.
Right, and they actually come here to study meteorology.
Right, that's all that they do here.
Yeah.
We have a good number, 5 PhD officers here, officers staying for their PhD right now, and they go back and get into the R&D and the development of capabilities and tools within cryptologic warfare or information professional networks.
Now, our information professionals, we still call them that?
Yes.
Or, okay, they are a little different group too, so what do they study and where do they go?
Majority of them work in cyberspace operations, or they'll work in network operations technology, where they understand what the needs are for advanced communications afloat in a denied environment where they don't have satellites or landline, then also how to make sure that it's secure.
Did I get everybody?
Yeah, that's everybody.
Okay.
Oh, then we also have the space cadre.
Oh, that's right.
So, which is any community, and there's space systems operations and space systems engineering. Some very smart people over there.
Yeah,
and,
there are some smart people.
Truly,
and we have
rocket
world-renowned faculty in that field as well.
We absolutely do. So
That's
what they work on there is truly cutting edge. And when they're putting it up as part of their thesis, what goes up in space, it's incredible.
Yeah, and be able to leverage that and know how to use it and that sort of thing. Well, what are some of the more interesting that you can talk about, thesis or research projects that your students do?
One of the most interesting ones I find right now is we have some students working on blockchain technology. This is what's used for Bitcoins, and it's all about making sure that the Bitcoin is secure and that it's not being manipulated on the internet.
Right.
So what they're using that is to see what the military applications are for Bitcoin technology to make sure that the information is both secure and reliable, so we can make sure that it hasn't been altered somehow unexpectedly. So our intelligence that we're getting is actually secure and verifiable.
So here we're borrowing something from the commercial financial community to ensure that we have our networks are not corrupted and that sort of thing.
Yes.
And
fascinating.
It is. And that's kind of neat, as a matter of fact. But any other research projects come to mind?
A lot of them get into how to better communicate more effectively in a denied environment. And so,
by denied environment, you have to explain.
Yeah, so what I'm talking about, an environment where you don't have your Wi-Fi because somebody's trying to turn it off or block it, or you just don't have any. So how do you develop a hotspot in the middle of Africa, for example, and be able to get those communications?
Sure. In fact, several of our research programs, when they were out in field experimentation, actually were able to benefit for the major disasters, because when that happened, they were able to set those up quite quickly. Well, I'd like to ask you one more question. It's a personal one now, instead of going back to your students, unless I've covered everything there. But what do you think was your most interesting tour, interesting experience in the Navy?
By far was the ship's intelligence officer on USS Nimitz, the aircraft carrier.
Oh, really? And the operations that you were doing?
It was, right. So we deployed in support of operations in Pakistan and Afghanistan, flying over Pakistan, sitting off the coast. It was truly everything that I had wanted to do as an intelligence officer, and doing it in a real-world environment for the military. It was great. Great sailors you're working for. I had 40-some-odd sailors working for me. Got to do nation's business, truly making an impact on everything. I really enjoyed that. 2 and 1, challenging in the fact that we got extended for 2 months.
Right.
Challenging on the family.
By extended for 2 months, you mean an 8-month deployment?
8-month deployment.
Yeah,
right.
you have to put that in total perspective.
Yeah,
that's right.
So 2 for free.
Yeah, you have to actually experience those to understand what they mean.
But just one of those tours that if I could have the opportunity to do that again, I'd jump on it.
Great. Well, Clark, thank you very much for your service at MPS and your service to our nation.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you for being on a Guest Today's show.
You bet. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for this segment of the YourTown television program. It's sponsored by the NPS Foundation, where we bring you interesting faculty and students and what they're doing in the Monterey Peninsula area.